Okay, let's talk about lesson 11's assignment, right? So it wasn't assigned yesterday, or not yesterday, last class, because the lecture took so long, because there's a lot going on with that, with the navigational stuff and being able to do stuff with lists. And I also changed the assignment, so this is what the new one is. You're going to make a copy of the horizontal HTML from the web dev thing. Let me go ahead and pull this up so we can see it. Horizontal. All right, so here's the example. If you click on this will take you to the web dev template repository where I push all the examples from class. You go into lesson 11, you'll copy the code from horizontal.html to be able to have this. You don't have to, but you probably should copy the R2D2 image as well so you have it. So this one is one of the examples we went through with the horizontal navigation. You're going to modify it and call it horizontal2.html using the techniques from the multi-level vertical list. You're going to add 3 sub-navigation items to the link 3 location and use this HTML code for the down arrow symbol for the icon of the sub-navigational list items. And it should look like the following when you're actually done. I don't know if I can get that image bigger. Yeah. Right, so it's going from this to this. The content's not different down here. We're just changing the nav bar. Make sense? You're adding 5, 6, 7. They'll all have the down arrow following the same sort of stuff that we did for the vertical multi-tier thing. That makes sense? But instead of vertical, it's horizontal. So there's a little bit of difference, but not a ton. Okay? So that's that assignment. I'm not going to worry too much about that one. That one will still be due on Monday. Assignment 12, we'll see where we get to for today. So let's go ahead and pull up lesson 12, and let's go through that. Okay, so I'm going to put this over there, bring this over here. Lesson 12. Creating layouts using modern CSS techniques. We're finally in layouts since we learned about the last thing you need for a layout, which is navigation bars. And we'll talk about that assignment in a bit. Move that over here. We'll close that. And we'll move this over here and close both of those. All right, I already made the lesson 12 folder and pushed it up because these files I'm going to work with today, and I didn't want to spend the time to create them. They're just from the book. So if you want to follow along, feel free to grab those files from that web dev repository if you want. So layouts. So we learned a lot about styling. So font sizes, colors, images, blocks, lists, all that kind of stuff. But we haven't discussed the high-level overview of style, which is called layout, right? Just because we can do all these things doesn't mean we know how to lay out a page. We need to make an idea for how pages go together. There are 2 basic types of layouts, a fixed layout and a liquid layout. A fixed layout, everything has an absolute position, and that position does not change regardless of screen size. Okay? A liquid layout, things move and change depending on your screen size. There's also hybrid, right? Mixing elements of the two. We'll learn about those. Modern CSS does great things for layouts and makes it so much easier to do. We got flexible boxes, CSS grids, all that kind of stuff. Let's go to something else. Okay, so before we get into layouts, there's three main points we have to fully understand before we can do it. The first is the CSS box model, because we're going to be finding areas, and we need to know how those areas are going to interact with each other, right? So the CS box model, right? We have the content, then outside of the content is what? If the content's the innermost square, what's the next square outside of the content? What goes around the content? Nobody remembers. Anyone want to take a guess? Yes. Padding. Yes. Padding goes around the content, right? It's inside the element, but around the content. Containing the content in padding is what? Yes. Border. And then outside of the border, we have margin. That's the box model. Margin, border, padding, content. By default, are those additive or subtractive? Additive. If I have a 5-pixel border, that's going to add to the width of my content, right? And that's really important to know when it comes to layout, because if you want something to be somewhere, you need to know its absolute size. And if you change that absolute size because you added some padding, added a bigger border, added some margin, that's really going to change your layout. So CSS box model, that's lesson 9 and 10. We've covered that pretty well. I really like Chrome's developer tools because it pulls that up for me when I choose some element and scroll down. Here's my CSS box model. I see I have a top margin of 6, a bottom margin of 6, 0 for the sides because it just has a hyphen, no border, no padding, and then there's the size of my element, which will change as I change the size of my screen, meaning that this is a liquid element. Make sense? If it was fixed, these numbers would not change. Okay? All right, let's put this back over here. The next one that is the button I want to know about is progressive enhancement. Now, progressive enhancement. It's the idea that you should start by creating web pages with the minimum required work and then enhance with design and interactive elements later. Does that make sense? It's kind of the same way of building an essay. You start with an outline, and then you start to flesh out the outline, and then you finish everything up later. Does that make sense? As you've learned about lots of things, it should, right? A lot of the CSS decoration you're going to do last, right? Don't worry about your font color until after you have all the text on the page, right? Don't worry about the background images or stuff like that until you actually know what the page elements are going to be. So progressive enhancement, start with the minimum and then build up from there. The last one is segregation of content or separation of content. I think technically segregation is the better of the words, but it's very weighted, so they didn't use that in the book, right? Separation of content. So you want to separate structure from design from interactivity. So the structure, aka the content of the web page, is written in what language?
Wait, what was the question again?
The content of the web page is written in what language?
GLA or something like that.
HTML?
Oh, just
Yeah.
kidding.
The base content is the hypertext.
Oh.
The paragraphs, the images, the actual tags. That's the first step of everything, and you want it to be separate from the design. What is design written in? CSS. And we want that to be separate from interactivity, which is, do you guys remember? We haven't touched it for a while. JavaScript. Yes. 3 separate files. You want them separate. But that kind of makes sense, right? If I want to change the design, I know where to go, and I won't mess up my content or my interactivity if I'm changing the design because it's inside the CSS file, right? So you really need to have those pages to be separate, and that will really help with the design. It also helps secure up your progressive enhancement, right? My HTML is inside my HTML. Once I'm done with the HTML, I'm going to add some CSS. Once I'm done with the CSS, I'm going to add some JavaScript. It helps flow that way, right? So we don't have to go back in and keep changing things. All right, so 3 main points. Understand the CSS box model. Really, you guys got that pretty well down. Progressive enhancement. Start small and grow big. And separation of content. Content first, design second, interactivity third. All right, with those 3 things, then we're ready to start learning about layouts, but we need to talk about mobile devices. Most web content is accessed on mobile devices in today's world. So you should put mobile devices first when you're planning layout. Does that mean you're planning your layout for the biggest possible screen size? No, it's going to be the smallest screen size. Because if it's enhanced for mobile, it will actually rank better in Google's SEO, search engine optimization. They're prioritizing mobile sites first over just desktop sites. I think I got statistics here. According to StatCounter, as of writing this book, which this book isn't that old. Let me pull up when that was made. 2019 copyright, so this is pretty fresh off the press. The most popular resolution worldwide is 360 pixels by 640 pixels. That is not big. All right, so if I go into mobile view and I set this would be 360 by 640. What does that look like? That's a mobile size, right? 360 by 640. That is the, what is it? 23% of every website visited is visited on that size. A quarter of every website is visited on this size of thing. So, mobile first design means that it's optimized for your smallest screen, which happens to be, by itself, the largest share. Does that make sense? All right, even in the United States, not even worldwide, the most popular resolution is 1920 by 1080, which is the size of these screens that we have. But that only counts for 10% of users accessing internet websites on a screen that size. And smaller resolutions like this 360 by 640 and even 375 by 667 are right beside at 10% and 9% respectively as well. So just because you're designing on a big screen, which if you do go into web design or any kind of design thing, you're going to have big screens and multiple monitors because it makes your life easy. Your customer won't. So having to think about that affects your layout. So we learned about that stuff. So using mobile devices is becoming more and more popular. Yeah, even from 2019 to 2021 or 2022, since we're almost there, it's the standard, right? We look up things on our phones. We always have our phones. That's how things are going to be pulled up a lot of the time. So thinking about that first helps things out. And then enhancing to have full-size support or even larger screen size support, right? If we pull up something like KSL News and we mess with this, right? It works on the mobile size, but as I get larger, it still works. Did the layout change from the mobile size to the larger size? Let me go back down to the mobile size. A little bit, right? It has these asides, right? These paddings on the side that once I reach, was it 400? No, about 525, they disappear. I'm going to cover how to do that. And then the layout down here, how does that change? Not by a ton, but it does a little bit for the mobile size. Did I change websites when I changed the screen size? No. That's the standard for today. Back when mobiles were new, talking like early 2010s, there was a mobile website that was separate from the desktop website. Two different web pages. You had to go to two different locations. And if you accessed a website from a mobile device, it would often redirect you to their mobile website because they could tell the size of your screen. Does that make sense? But that's not the way we do things anymore. We do something called responsive, so that you can maintain one website that changes how it looks based on the screen. It makes things a lot easier to operate. We can see how the header very much is responsive, right? On bigger screens, we actually have the stuff here, and then when we get a little bit smaller, then we have a hamburger menu. That's what the 3 lines are called. It's called a hamburger. And then we get even smaller. But we do have a minimum size, and if we get smaller than that size, then we're going to have to scroll, right? Because I'm cutting that all off. Anyways, going back. All right, so as you're planning for things, plan for your smallest screen size first with your layout, because if it works on a small screen, it will work on a big screen, right? You'll just have lots of extra space on the sides, which isn't that big of a deal, which KSL definitely does have, right? It has all this stuff here, which usually gets filled with ads once the ads decide to come through, if they're going to come through. I don't think they are. They used to be. There's a lot of gaming websites that do the same thing, like Minecraft's Wikipedia page. Fills the padding on the sides with stuff. Sometimes it has ads, a huge ad in the border. That's always great. You kind of know what I'm talking about, though. They fill the extra stuff with fluff, and then when you go to smaller screens, it changes the layout, right? Instead of having so many columns, we now went down to one column. But not terribly responsive because it's just getting tiny. All right. Okay, so let's talk about fixed layouts. A fixed layout is also known as a fixed width layout. The height, we don't really care about fixing because the height is however long our article is, right? Or however long our content is. But the width will be fixed. The body of the page is set to a specific width. The width is typically controlled by a master wrapper element that contains all of the content, and the width property of the wrapper is usually inside like a div. And the style sheet is given an ID such as main or wrapper, even though the name is up to you. It doesn't really matter what it's called. When creating a fixed width layout, the most important decision is to determine the smallest size that you want it to work on, because that's the size you'll be designing for. And if I pull up the book, oh man, every time. Not lesson 1. I don't want lesson 1, I want lesson 12. 7, 9. Because I want some images. Okay. So here's an example from whenever they made it. For many years, 800 by 600 was the lowest common denominator for a web page. So they made that slightly squarish screen. Do you guys kind of know what I'm talking about? You've seen older films where they had those square screens. I hated them. I hate square screens. But that was 800 by 600 was the standard for that. So they would design for an 800 by 600, which is this size right here. And then if you viewed it on a larger screen, the main content is still 600 by 800. Or fixed width, which would be the 600? Yeah, because it's height by width? Or is it width by height?
For sure it's width by height.
Width by height, so 800? And then you just have all this extra stuff here. So fixed width, right? A lot of empty space, which is legitimately called real estate in web dev. It's free real estate, right? That's not what you really want when you're designing a web page because it doesn't look good. So they kind of have this circle thing. Don't know if you can see, but they have the circles over here to kind of continue that pattern. But KSL would fall under one of these fixed width style sites because it's trying to keep that extra space that it's just not going to ever use because it's designed to fit on a smaller screen. Make sense? You also need to decide if you're going to center stuff or if it's going to be just a left or a right, to figuring out how to do that. That's usually, this would be a little bit of a hybrid because it's going to center the content instead of just having the content always be to the left and then having massive amounts of padding on one side. That's even worse than this layout, right? You got to remember that stuff. Liquid layouts, okay. Pure liquid layouts. Things move a lot, which is why things are usually hybrid, because obviously with a fixed layout, a pure fixed, a different screen size doesn't work, right? Because you have to move things over. Has anyone gone to a web page that was not optimized for mobile before? No? It's really not common anymore. It was about 10 years ago, but they've really nipped it in the butt. You would have to scroll to the right and scroll all over the place to see the page because it doesn't fit the mobile screen. That would be a fixed width issue, seeing a desktop site on mobile. But again, those terms don't really exist anymore. So with a liquid layout, if you have a really tiny screen, things pull up like this, and then you get an even smaller screen, then you have this issue. Instead of not being visible, they're now going to overlap and compress. Does that make sense? Which, I mean, between the two, it's kind of like pick your poison. Which one do you think is worse? Overlapping stuff that you can't read, or having to scroll around to see your image, right? Both aren't great. If you go bigger, then there's tons of extra space because it's more the way it's going to be, okay? Horizontal scroll bars just is the worst. One of the base goals you should always have as a web developer is to never have a horizontal scroll bar on your website, right? You shouldn't have to scroll left to right. Up and down, that's okay. Left to right, not good. All right, let's see. Creating a mix. All right, now let's actually get into some stuff and show how this stuff works. So I'm going to do a little bit of something different from this. Let's pull up my example. Do I have it? No, I don't. Okay, so I have some content, right? Hooray, content. We have a header that has an image. We have our main body of content. We have an aside. Oh, wait. We have a nav which is an aside that's supposed to be on the left. We have an add that's an aside that's supposed to be on the right, and then we have a footer. But right now without CSS, this is how it shows, right? So if I pop that over here and close this and go to my content, we can see header with an image, the main section, right? That wrapper idea, so I can work with things fluidly. That has an article with the main content, an aside for my navigation, and another aside for my ad, and then a footer. Right? So all the main stuff is inside my main section, whereas the header and footer are not, because they will span the entire page. We're good with the basic layout of this? Make sense? Okay. Let's actually make it a good layout. So we're going to make some CSS. I'm going to make a new file here. I'm going to call this one hybrid, because this is going to be a mix between fixed and fluid, but not using modern CSS. This is semi-old stuff. To start, we're going to set the body. And does doing this kind of lecture stuff work good for you guys, going through all this? Yeah, okay. That's what I figured. It's worth it to make it longer if I'm going through this examples like this, because it's really hard to misunderstand when it's like, okay, this line does this, and we're typing it. All right, we're going to set the margin to 0. Margin to 0. Right, and that defaults to all 4 sides of the margin. I think I've messed up in previous ones when I'm saying the 4 steps. It's top, right, left, bottom. Right?
Did you say it was like clockwise? It went top, right, bottom, left?
Top, right, bottom, left. Yes, that's it. I keep messing up. Top, right, bottom, left. If you just do 2, it's top and bottom, left and right. Then there's 3, but 3 is weird. I don't ever use 3, and it's not extremely common. It's more common to have 1, 2, or 4, which makes sense. Everything's the same, the top and the bottom the same, and the left and right are the same, or everything's different. All right, so we're getting rid of this default body margin, because body by default has a margin of 8. We're going to get rid of the default padding to 0. And we're going to set a minimum width. I can TH, oh my gosh. I just need to switch the L and the semicolon key. All right, minimum width. This is a new element that you haven't seen before. If it gets smaller than that size, it's going to stop being liquid and create the horizontal scroll bar. Right? Because if we go to like 100 pixels, which no screen size is 100 pixels wide, you wouldn't be able to read a dang thing, because everything would be on top of each other. Right? And then things would be behind each other, and right, z-indexes issues. So we're not going to deal with that. So I want to throw that in there. The minimum width, yeah, so does the minimum width of an element. It does not include the padding, borders, or margin by default, right? Just like width does not include the padding, borders, or margin by default, right? Those are added on separately. So I'm going to come down here. We're going to add some stuff. What else are we going to add? We're going to figure out where the heck the code is that I'm working with. I was on the wrong page. Here it is. Okay, so that min width, that was earlier than I wanted to cover that, but that's okay. We'll just do it now. And then you can see how it messes with stuff later. Actually, I think we could actually see it now. So let me do that. And then come here. Right? So if I get smaller than the minimum, it should... you probably can't see it. I got disconnected for a second. Am I still streaming?
Yeah.
Okay. OBS was throwing some errors my way. Okay. We'll come back to the mid-width. I'm going to take it off for now. No, I'm going to leave it on. We'll mess with it again later. All right. Let's do some stuff for the header and footer. We're going to have them both be the same. G-A-D-E-R, footer. Right? We're going to make it float to the left. Give them widths of 100%. Okay, now come back here and refresh. You're not going to see anything different yet, of course. All right, because I wanted to add more. We need to get a background color. Background color. We're going to go with 7152F4. And we'll make the text color white. If I wanted the hexadecimal code for white, what is that?
Is it all F?
All F, right? Maximum value. All right, now if I refresh, I'm going to get some new stuff. I should get some. I need to link the CSS to the page. That's why nothing is working. Of course, okay. Hybrid.css. Right, remember from the earlier lessons, lesson like 3 maybe, when we're doing CSS? The link element inside the head is how you pull in a style sheet. It has to have a relationship of style sheet, and then you put the href to the name of that file. Thank you. That's why it wasn't working. So now if I refresh, we see the color that we added, and the mid-width is still not doing what I thought it was going to do, but that's okay. Figure it out later. Okay. Let's add some stuff to the main content. Right, that's that section that contains my article and 2 asides. We're going to set them to float left. We'll give it padding on the left side of 200 pixels. And let's give it padding on the right side of 125 pixels. All right, let me close this CSS thing and then hit refresh. Still can't see anything, right? Did I save? I did. It's fine.
You need to put the hashtag in front of the main because it's an ID.
Because it's an ID. Thank you. There we go. All right, so I got my padding on the sides now. Moving my main stuff inside. This is where we're going to put our nav is going to be over here on the left, and this ad is going to be over here on the right, but we haven't moved them yet, so they're not there yet. All right, so there's their main content. Now we're going to do another ID. Yep, hashtags. Secondary content. So secondary content is my nav. I'm just going to be working with IDs. I could just easily have said that this was a nav and done stuff with that, but I'm doing it this way because that's how the book did it, and I want to make less mistakes because I'm very prone to make mistakes, as you guys have been watching. We're going to set the position to relative. Position, relative. autocomplete is your friend when it comes to typing these things out. Right, less spelling errors. We're going to float it to the left. We're going to set the width to 200 pixels because that's the size of the padding that we're going to put it in. We're going to set the background color to 52F471. We're going to position it to the right 200 pixels. And we're going to set the margin on the left to negative 100%. I always mess up spelling margin. All right, so now if we see what this does, our nav disappeared, which should make sense, right? A margin to the left of negative 100%, a negative margin. So it's to the left off the screen right now, because I want it to come and overlap this area right here, but it's not positioned there yet. So right now it's to the left off the screen so we can't see it, but it's there. We just have to add more stuff before it pops back over. All right, so we'll come back over here. Now we're going to do our tertiary content. Hooray for autocomplete, because that's a hard word for me to spell. Position relative. Float left. Width 125 pixels. Background color F452D5. Margin right negative 125 pixels. All right, we will be able to see that one because our screen is bigger, because we haven't set it yet to be able to come up, right? So this one's right here, whereas the nav one is still down below this content, but to the left. Once we set stuff so it can pop up, then it will be visible. All right. Lastly, we're going to do the main content. Oh, right, I usually do that. And this is where the things are going to fix up. So position, relative, float, left. Oh my gosh. Background color, we're going to leave it white. And width 100%. Right, because we have our main, which holds all the content, but this article is our main content. So now with that having a float on it, did I save it? I did. Now we can see the stuff coming up. Right, so a fixed thing. So if I change the screen size, the width stays, they stay where they're supposed to do, right? We don't have a set height, so it automatically adapts as needed. But if I get less than 500, I start to cover my stuff because I have a minimum screen size. Make sense? That min width. I don't have a max width, so if I go up all the way, it just goes whoosh. Okay. So this is a hybrid layout. We have some fixed elements and some liquid elements. Fixed elements have things set in pixels, px. The liquid elements have things set in percentages, because that percentage changes based on the size of the screen. Or the percentage doesn't change, the actual size changes based on the size of the screen. Does that make sense for a fixed or hybrid layout style? Okay. Yeah, let me go ahead and drop out the min width just to show you what that looks like without it. So without the min width, I can come over here. Oh, I can't go any smaller. F12. I can come over and it's just gone, right? But with the min width, which I'm going to turn back on, it's still being a pain. It's supposed to be 525. I'm actually changing the size of the entire device, so that might be part of it. I don't know. It's supposed to keep the layout from breaking apart when resized below the minimum width. Which means this will get hidden instead of snapping down here. But we didn't see that, so it's fine. Doesn't matter. FYI, the internet changes constantly, and so does HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So trying to keep up to date, very difficult to do as a teacher. So when I do some things, sometimes they will work, sometimes they won't, because even though this book is only almost 3 years old, that's enough time for things to get seriously different. Okay, so handling column height. Right. So these columns for this layout, it doesn't look right, because this color should go to the footer, right? That makes sense? This is a full section here. This is not 2 sections. We should have that column go all the way. So let's go back to our code and add that stuff. So we're going to go to secondary, tertiary, and main content IDs and add some stuff to it. But instead of adding them separately inside each one, to make it easier, since this one thing is shared by all 3, we could have done this for some other ones too, by the way. We're going to link them together. Does that make sense? So I can add something here that gets applied to all 3 of them. Likely I could pull out these 2, right? Position relative and float left, and put it here because they're shared by all 3. It's just this idea of planning before you start building a website, or sometimes you want to keep everything separate so that it's easier to change later on. Does that make sense? It really comes down to your personal preference or your boss's preference when you're doing stuff here. But for this one, I don't want to type these things 6 times, so I'm going to do it just here. Margin bottom. We're going to set to negative 2,000 pixels. That should be big enough, right? And padding bottom to 2,000 pixels. All right, when we come back here and we hit refresh, now it goes to the bottom of the page. Wait, where'd my footer go? I think it knocked out my footer. Oh, because I have to add something to my footer. My footer has to be relative now. But not my header, so I'm going to do I didn't have to put the footer right here. I'm just doing it because, right, keeping similar things close to each other is a good idea. So if I came back, I could do things separately. All right, I have to make the footer position relative. So now, there it is. All right, is that better? Not really. Because do I need all this stuff down here? No. This is not much better. It's good that it filled up this, but is there really a way for me to figure that out? Like if I shrink the screen size, okay, it automatically fixed because this is fixed to be huge. Do I want a fixed height? No, I want a liquid height. Something that will change, right? We're going to change some stuff a little bit. We're going to clip off the bottom of the columns. So for the main, we're going to say overflow is hidden, right? So anything extra outside of the main section is going to get cut off. Oops. Is that better? Yes, that is much better. Right? So it looks like it's being responsive. It's still technically fixed. So if my article was more than 2,000 pixels, it wouldn't keep going. Right? But as the content creator, I kind of know the size of what's going in there, and I know I'm not going to be bigger than that. So you can kind of do things a little bit easier by mixing things here and there. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's see what else we got. Is that it for that one? Yes, that is it for that one. So this is a hybrid layout. We have some fixed elements, we have some liquid elements, and together it kind of works. So talk to me some about pros and cons with this one. What do you think was easy about creating this? Besides the fact that you didn't have to do it. Let's go back to the code. Mid-width isn't hard to do. Colors aren't hard to do. Floating to the left with 100% not hard to do. What about these paddings right here? It's pretty simple, but that does require you to know exactly the size of what's going to be going in somewhere. And let's say one of my links all of a sudden got longer. It's not going to be on one line, right? Because this is fixed. So that's going to be a bit of a pain with a fixed layout, is knowing the actual size of the elements and where they're going to be. Sometimes that's what you want. You're going to want it to always be laid out a certain way. Sometimes that's not what you want. Sometimes you want it to fit the content. Does that make sense? So that's one of the biggest disadvantages of fixed hybrid layout, is having to know exact sizes before you go in. And if I change the size of this, I have to change the size of a lot of other things, right? Because it's not just the width of the aside. Let me go ahead and undo that because I don't want that there. Right? Just not the width of my secondary content. It's also the padding left of the main content that I have to change. And I have to remember to change both, and they have to both be the same thing. Otherwise, it's not going to work and it's going to break my layout. So that's not great. And if, let's say, we had multiple articles, then you can see how this is starting to get ridiculous. I have to know the exact size of every main section of my web page before I can make my layout. That's not great. That's where some of the modern CSS stuff comes in. So let's go ahead and I'm going to skip over that. Oh, there's some more stuff I should add. Yep. So it now has good column spacing, but we still need to finish up the nav bar and some other stuff. Right? Because nav bars should not look like lists. Right? All right, so let's fix that up. Let's go. Where is that? That is. And there's some other things too. Maybe I'll add it to your assignment for this one. Or should I do it with you guys? I'll do it with you guys. No, I'll add it to the assignment. I don't know. Make my decision. All right, let's do it. Okay. All right, so the footer. What's wrong with the footer? Give me some design stuff about this footer that's not good. Centered. Footing content is usually centered. Right? So let's go ahead and do that. Come over here. Let's see. Position relative. Text align. Center. Let's see. What else did they do? White with that light blue is kind of hard to see. It's darker on that screen than it actually is. It's more of a purplish blue. So we're going to change the text color. To all C's. Give us kind of a gray. And footers aren't really part of the main content, so we want to change the style of the text so that we know it's different. It's usually copyright stuff and things like that, so throwing it italic is usually a good idea too, right? It's important information, but it's not stuff that we want to catch the people's eye, so we make it less noticeable, right? So that's much better for the footer. Let's see what else we can fix here. Just checking what's different between theirs and mine. Ooh. Let me take a look at something. It's kind of a design choice, but we'll go with that. Let me turn off the mobile. All right, so selecting our header, what would you do to improve the header? Centering might be a good idea. What about the space above and below? Its margin. What do you think? Be reduced a bit. Having this extra space on the top is kind of redundant. Having the space before the bottom stuff sometimes works. All they did in theirs is they just took out the margin. So I'm just going to follow what they got because that just makes it easier. Right, I'm just going to add another one here. Going off of their design to say what looks good. Save your, I did save my file. What is happening? I'm confused. Did I spell margin wrong again? Is that what I did? No.
It's linked to H1 on that text. Oh wait, no, because
It's linked to H1, that's right, because the header is the freaking image. The heading is H, right? Come on, Simonson, use the right terms. All right, so that removed the space from the top. It technically also removed the space from the bottom of that element. The content here has padding that had the space above. That makes sense? So that looks better, having it go to the top. The header is a little bit bigger than it should be. I don't think we're going to worry about that, though. Let me check some more stuff. Yeah, let's do it. Okay. Because it's worth it to go through this to point out these elements because you guys are learning. All right. In our secondary content, which is this thing here. Where is this button? U. You see how weird this stuff is? Because we have a negative margin, right? So we're throwing it way over there. It's kind of funky. But that's how it works, right? So when we have a position, our box model, at least in Chrome, shows us our actual position in addition to the margin, border, padding, and content size. So it's over 200 pixels because this padding size right here is 200 pixels. If it wasn't over 200 pixels, it would be going over here, right? That's not what we want. So this thing includes fixing up the nav. That's what it's doing. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the bottom here. We're going to say secondary content UL list. It says list style is valid. I haven't been able to get that to work. Apparently it's working now. I must have spelled something wrong the other day. All right, so we're going to get rid of those bullet points. We are going to get some margin going on. We're going to have a 12 pixel margin on the top, 0 on the right, 0 on the bottom, and 12 on the left. So we have to do all 4 to make that happen. We're going to get rid of the padding, even though padding technically already is 0 because it's inheriting it from its parent stuff. Setting things, if you want it to be something exactly, makes it so when you change something else, it doesn't change things below it, right? Because it's cascading style sheets. I can spell padding. Okay. Did I not take out the... Oh, that comes later. Okay. And then we're doing the fancy link stuff that you should always do for nav stuff. So secondary li a link visited font size 12 point. Important distinction. Fonts are in points, sizes are in pixels. Don't put your fonts in pixels. All right? Not PX, PT. That's very important. They are very different. Font weight, bold, padding with semicolons in between. 0, 3. Color, black. Text, decoration, none, display, block. All right, then we're going to copy most of this, paste it, because we're just going to change the hover and active. To be white. Okay. That's better. Now it looks like a nav bar. Okay. This isn't everything. There's a few things that is left to make this better, but that'll be part of the assignment, and we'll pull that later. All right, we're going to go on to modern CSS techniques now. Fixed liquid hybrid stuff is still used. It's just not used as often because it can be way more powerful with the modern CSS layout techniques. So I'm going to make let's talk about this first. Let's talk about the 3 modern CSS techniques. The first one we're going to talk about that I'm not going to show, and then we'll talk about 2 more, I think, with examples. Here. All right, so we covered fixed and liquid and hybrid. Right, we defined columns, min and max widths. You should set max width sometimes. That's a good idea. Just like you have a minimum size, you can have a max size. If it's bigger than that, it will just add padding to the sides, right? Column heights, we did that as well. So table layout. Let's scroll down and show you some stuff inside the book. All right, so using display table makes the CSS act kind of like an HTML table, even though it is not an HTML table. So you can convert any element into a table by using display table in the CSS. Once you do that, you can use these kind of things to work with it. So if we just say table, that makes the element act like a table. We say table row, it's going to act like a TR element. The reason I'm not going to show an example of this is because this is one of the more complicated modern ways to do something. But there is a big benefit to using tables. Who remembers something that can be done with tables that can't be done with other things? There's one thing. I don't know if you'll remember. Vertical centering can be done in tables. Cannot be done in other things, but can be done in tables. Right? Horizontal centering is just margin auto, but with tables, you can actually center things vertically as well. So that's the only real reason to go with the CSS table, in my opinion. And then there's that right there. A lot of people say don't ever use tables for HTML layout. It's different. You can do a CSS table layout, never use HTML tables to do your layout. That makes sense? CSS is your layout, not HTML. Do not put things into an HTML table on your website and have that be your layout. That is a really bad idea. Anyways, has to do with accessibility and stuff like that. I'm not going to go through the example of that because they end up doing kind of the same thing. They just move it around a little bit differently. And you can go through the book example if you want to see that. The ones that I see more used more commonly, unless you need to vertically align content, because again, that is the reason to use CSS table layout. If you need to vertically center something, I would suggest having part of your layout be a CSS table and having that part use the vertical setting instead of doing the whole thing, because flexible box layout and grid layout is so much easier to work with. Okay. So let's talk about Flexbox. I don't really think I need to cover the table layout more. You just say display, and then you tell it one of these options, and that's what it will act like based on an HTML table. The CSS of any element will turn into that based on display table something. Does that make sense? Any questions on CSS table displays? No? Yeah, it's just straightforward. You just say just display table cell. Boom. Now all three of these are going to act like a TR element. No, a TD element. Sorry. TR is table row. Okay. Vertical align, yada, yada, yada. So flex containers. It gives you a way to position elements that display on a line in a container. And then the container can alter the dimensions, and the elements will best fit using the available space. The easiest way to show that is to show this image. If you want your content to automatically justify, flex is the way to go. Flex start, I have 3 elements. They show up here. Flex end, they show up at the end of the element. I can center it. I can justify it with space between or space around. And you can see how this has a huge benefit over the fixed layout. Instead of saying, okay, this thing's 15% here, and then this would be maybe 50%, and this would be 60, 83%, whatever, I can just put them in a flex, say space around, and boom, it will always be evenly distributed. That make sense? So with layout stuff like that, that's really useful. So to do that, you make a container element with a class. So any element can turn into a flexible box element. We just change the display property and say flex. And then we can tell it flex direction to be row, row reverse, column, column reverse. We can have it wrap, right, loop around, right? Then there's the justify content thing, which is what I just showed you about. When it comes to layouts, it's really a lot of trial and error. But this makes sense with the beginning stuff from the lesson, right? If I segregate my content and I have my HTML good to go, then I can mess with many different layouts and just link different CSS pages, right? To see how it works. And when it comes to the design of stuff, the right and wrong answers don't really exist when it comes to that, right? Does your client think it looks good? Then you did it right. If they don't like it, change it so they like it, right? It's very, very subjective. Whereas with the content, it's harder, right? Words have to be spelled a certain way. You know, people expect to see things to the left or right of something, but still, layouts are kind of fun. All right, Flexbox. Let's see. So what else we got? We got Right, also things you can do inside for multiple lines in your container with the aligning of content. Stretch, center, space between, space around, flex start, flex end. Order, you can change the order without moving things around, which is helpful because now I don't have to move the HTML to change the layout. I can set the order in the CSS the way I want to display. So this is the CSS for that. I mean, it looks pretty much the same. The size of this is different. That one's bigger than the other one. The table, they messed it up a little bit. But the idea here is if I just took this CSS and linked this, same content. Nothing changed with the content, just the CSS changes the page. Same thing with the table up here, wherever it may be. Same content, same HTML, the CSS changed the order it was displayed in. Does that make sense? And that helps support the progressive enhancement. Start with the content and then start messing with it with the CSS. All right, the one that we are going to go through again and have another one is the grid, CSS grid layout. Because I think that's kind of the easier way to go. Because inside the grid, you would put flexible items and table displays. Is how I would work with stuff. So the idea with a grid layout is you have an idea how your web page is going to be laid out, right? So I have an idea for this web page. There's going to be 4 main columns, and there's going to be 3 main rows. Right? So there's going to be column 1, row 1 is going to be 100 pixels by 100 pixels. Column 2, row 1 is going to be auto width by 100 pixels tall. Auto height by 100 pixels tall. 100 pixels wide. My gosh, I can do this. All right, does that make sense? How this would come out? So this kind of takes the benefit of you have an idea where you want things to be. You're dividing up your space, not necessarily into equal grid sizes, but you'll have distinct areas. This makes it easier to draw a box and say, okay, let me pull that up. To do this, to come up with a rough sketch of a layout and then use your CSS grids to make those areas. Does that make sense, what I'm saying with that? Yeah. Because this is usually how people brainstorm. They say, okay, I kind of like this layout for my website. So then you predefine those spaces because you have an idea of what content will go inside those spaces. This lends itself really well to a grid, right? But inside the grid, with this services things here, that's probably going to be a flexible CSS element inside my grid layout, right? So that they're evenly distributed. Make sense? So you don't just use one thing if you're using the modern CSS, you kind of apply all of them. Flexible and modern is the way you want to do a lot of stuff with that. All right, so let's go back to this example. Let's make a new, let's call this grid, not .html, .css, and let's link it in our site. So instead of hybrid, we'll have grid. just double check. Oops. That is not what I wanted to do. Oh, I want to do flicks. Oh, I want to do grid and flex. Oops. All right. I'm not going to be able to finish this lesson today. That's good news for you guys because that means you get less homework. Do I want to stop here? How much time do I have? I want to stop here. I'm going to stop here. Okay. When we come back, let's talk about what we're going to do when I come back so I can at least watch the video and remember. Okay, when we come back, we're going to make a grid.css, and I'm going to make another file. We're also going to make a flex.css to use the flex style elements and the grid style elements. Should I also do the table? Should we just say why not and go for it? Sure. I mean, we got time. I've decided that the state test probably is not going to happen this semester. We'll probably bump it to early in the next semester because we're not going to be able to get through the content, which doesn't matter. So let's make another file. Just so that you have all those things to work with. Okay, so when we come back, we'll make a table, we'll make a flex, and we'll make the grid CSS so that you'll have a hybrid grid, flex, and table, with the hybrid being the fixed liquid style. To really give you some options with that, I'm going to go ahead and stage and commit these. I'm going to change that to table real fast though, because that's the first one we're going to start on. What was this, 12 part 1? Okay, so let's talk about the assignment then. Close that, close that. All right. Is lesson 12 your current assignment? No, because we're not done with lesson 12. So this is not assigned yet. The dates will change. So what's your current assignment? 11. And what are you doing for 11? That. You're adding the 3 sub-navigational links to the horizontal page. Okay? This one's going to still be due Monday. I have it set so everyone's coming in on Friday. We'll spend some time working on this. I'm not sure if we'll do a lesson or not because it's short. Okay? But I still want people to come in. All right. I'm ending the stream.